If you have done any work with me, then you know that I love assessments, DISC, profile, Enneagram, Strengths Finder, whatever it might be. I believe that it really helps you operate as you. So today I'm very excited because we have Robert Jordan, the leadership author, not the fantasy author as seen on Amazon, who's going to be on the show today. And we're going to be talking about 4 different styles of leadership. So whether you're growing your career or at the top of your career, this is going to be helpful for you. So check it out.
Welcome to Advance with Mike Acker, the podcast designed to help entrepreneurs, business leaders, and professionals alike break through barriers by improving their practical leadership skills and increasing confidence in speaking. Your host is a best-selling author, executive coach, and founder of the Advance Public Speaking School and Advantage Publishing Group, 2 companies dedicated to providing an edge for leaders. Find out more about Mike at mikeacker.com. Now here's your host, Mike Acker.
Robert, welcome to the show. Glad to have you today.
Thanks so much, Mike. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Now, in just a moment, we're going to talk about who you are and why you're a good person to answer this question. But let's get into something kind of juicy right away. Why is it that these celebrity leaders, these big leaders, screw up? And how is it that they screw up?
Because they do one thing great, and they and we start assuming they can do everything great, and that's simply not true of any human being. And it's certainly not true of any leader.
So they build a great company, they build a great product, and what is something that perhaps they think that they're great at, and how does that translate to their failure?
Well, they could screw up in any aspect. So we've identified these 4 styles: fixer, artist, builder, and strategist. And for example, the builder, if things go south, needs to call in a fixer. So a great example right now would be Peloton. Peloton, great bikes, great in COVID. Could have been a questionable strategy to start building a 1 million square foot factory in the US, unless COVID was going to be forever the way that it was. But clearly there was a point where a fixer would have been a great idea.
Got it. So it's almost like these great leaders, they don't bring in somebody else to run a different lane. And they keep trying to stay in the same lane that made them famous in the first place.
Right. Now, some leaders can advance, like Fred Smith just retired as CEO of Federal Express. My God, 51-year run. And he went as an evolution of a leader through various styles. He clearly was showing this innovative artist streak by thinking of a paper while he was in college for Federal Express, right? It was a crazy idea, used jets to deliver packages overnight. Right? He was an example of someone who evolved through fixer, artist, builder, and became the consummate strategist. Most leaders do not. Most leaders have some more shorter journey to a particular style that we would describe as highest and best use.
Got it. Okay, this is going to be really interesting. I'm really looking forward to this. So welcome to everybody who's listening. This is going to be a great conversation with Robert Jordan, and not Robert Jordan, whose show is on Amazon right now. This is a different Robert Jordan, right? I got that right.
I'm never going to come up high, number one in search, because there was the fantasy author, Robert Jordan. Pre-internet, people would call me and they're like, "Oh my God, are you the creator of the fantasy books?" And I'm like, "No." And do you understand that wasn't even his real name? It was a pen name. but then Google comes around and is like, "Yeah, you have a name so generic, you're never going to rank on it."
So this is not that Robert Jordan who's on Amazon if you're watching that show, but this is Robert Jordan who has written a book, and we'll talk about it, Right Leader, Right Time. And we're going to really be diving into something that's really going to help you as you're listening in this, driving your car, watching this on YouTube. And here's really the premise, is what kind of leader are you? And we're going to discover your leadership style, which can make or break your career. And this is going to be extremely helpful. But before we dive into how to do this, the 4 different leadership styles, and really some takeaways for our audience, who are you, if you're not the fantasy author, who are you, and why are you a good person to talk about this?
So I help run a company called Interim Execs. And we've had this experience for many years of having been approached. Now it's over 7,000 executives from 50 countries. And years ago, we started ranking and scoring and screening and developing criteria for what is excellence in a leadership role, and in particular in projects. Because as you know, Mike, the world has become very much project oriented in the sense that very few people are going to spend their entire career at one company. Yeah. Highly unlikely. And instead, it's like what Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, said when he was welcoming new employees to LinkedIn. He would say, this is a tour of duty. And we understand you're probably going to have a lot of tours of duty, in your journey, your career. And that is the way that work has evolved. And so we developed this remarkable ability to be this rapid reaction force in the world where organizations would call us and we would deploy an amazing executive. It really was akin to kind of Hollywood to being a talent agent where, in Hollywood, you represent Brad Pitt, Julia Roberts, Anne Hathaway. Well, in our case, them into engagements.
Got it. And just pause there for a second. Hopefully that won't be caught up on the recording there. But in that, I love that you are finding these execs, you're putting them in places, and I'm sure that a lot of what you've learned in that is something that now you're going to share with us. So what are the 4 different leadership styles? You hinted at it before, but what are they? And then break it down for us and help us understand a little bit more. And then we'll talk about how those influence business decisions.
The 4 styles are fixer, artist, builder, and strategist, or FABs for short. When you think of fixer is the person who loves running into the burning building. We distinguish that type of leader because they keep on running into burning buildings. So once they've had a successful experience fixing a client relationship, a division, a company, a community, an industry, once that has reached a steady state, more stability, success, that person is going to get bored and they need to move on to the next troubled situation. Artist is the mode where you see the world as a blank canvas or a piece of clay. You are just driven to create, sometimes at your own peril, sometimes at the risk of career, fame, money, that creative urge has got to get satisfied. There are famous examples in the world, but if you are the person who is driven to thinking about the new product, the next iteration, the next brand message, you've got that dominant artist wiring. Builder. Now, everybody in business wants to be a builder. We got that. Builder mode here specifically means that kind of leadership expertise that is great at building system, process, product, service, people, and taking a small team, a small group, a small client up to a dominant position. The thing with builder wiring is that once that is achieved, it's going to get boring. And most builders will then seek next product, company, division, client with which to go scale again. Finally, a strategist. Strategist is the leader who operates at scale. They operate in highly complex and large organizations where personal span of control, using that Stephen Covey phrase, is impossible. In other words, you can't lead based just on personal relationships because you don't know everybody. And so there is a completely different challenge there in terms of how do you move a vast organization forward far better than any competitor.
So these different types of leaders and people who are listening to this, I have people who are running these huge companies, and I have people who are really inspiring to be a leader in some way, and people all across the spectrum. So as you're listening to this, you're thinking about which one am I? Help us identify a little bit of what a fixer might look like in some different scenarios. So you're HR manager listening to this, you're an aspiring entrepreneur listening to this. What might a fixer look like in some different roles?
Fixer is the best example we think of for fixer is you're doing great in an organization and they think so highly of you that a challenge comes around and they think, we should give this to Mike because this looks impossible. And just a mere mortal is not going to be able to solve this. So they give it to Mike, they give it to you, and you may not have done it before, but you crush it. I mean, you completely solve it. And if you're fixer wiring, you're hooked. Because from then on, going back to steady state, where things are not really wrong, just not going to satisfy you. And so in larger organizations, you become a troubleshooter, and you're the person that literally could parachute anywhere to solve problems. In the way a lot of work is organized now, you may go to a different organization. Specifically, you're now looking for trouble. Does that describe that mode?
Yeah. So what are some of the strengths of a fixer? And then what are some of the weaknesses of a fixer?
It's a great question. The fixer is very linear. Fixer is, you are driving for this solution. I'll tell you one thing that is very different from artist mode, for example. Artist requires, this is an oxymoron, but they require parallel focus. If you're wired for artist, you cannot just work at one thing at a time. If you look at, the literal definition of artist, you look at someone like a famous painter like Monet, he had 25 canvases going at the same time. He needed that. You want someone famous now, Elon Musk, Tesla, SpaceX. Is he going to buy Twitter? Brain research, the Boring Company, on and on. He needs that multiple focus in which to thrive. Contrast that with fixer or builder mode, it's very linear. You will find that great leaders of troubled organizations, there is no other distraction. They're not doing any other companies. They are laser focused on, they have to solve this one problem. That is the strength of that kind of wiring. Flip side is, if somebody is describing themselves as the greatest fixer in the world, but they got 5 things going on at once, not optimal.
Got it. So if you go into an organization and you're a fixer or a group or whatever type of management role, and you are a fixer, but there's so many different things to fix, what does a fixer do?
Well, one of the things we say in the book that we see as a common pattern among successful leaders, sometimes we call them FABS leaders, is they reject what is not for their highest and best use. And we're talking now about the key thing that distinguishes highly successful leaders from the majority, which is the majority of leaders, call it out of desperation or whatever, they try to do too much. They try to take on too many roles. They try to be all things to all people, and that just doesn't work. One of the examples that we use that brings this home for people is looking at healthcare and medicine, okay? Mike, you and I are becoming buddies, and if you got a pain in your foot, if I know a great podiatrist, I'm gonna tell you, but I absolutely am not gonna say, I know this great OBGYN. Not gonna apply. And even if you went to the OBGYN, they would say, I'm not going to treat you. This is not my area of expertise. You need a podiatrist. I'm gonna refer. They're not even gonna try to be the expert, right? And so you look at that profession of medicine, which has now 100 specialties, and the results for society are dramatic, longer lifespans, healthier outcomes. Well, in business, we're not there yet. In business, you do one thing well, and the world says, oh my God, you must be able to do everything well.
Yeah, that is a fantastic point. Okay, so a fixer goes in reflecting on my own leadership career, coming into an organization that was $1 million of debt, and there was some overwhelming but also some exciting aspect to that, and a little bit that fixer mentality. So for you, as you're looking at this and you're listening to Robert, are you a fixer? Are you drawn to those challenges? Are people putting you there, or are you overwhelmed by it? Let's talk about the artist. What is the artist leader? You already talked about the different parallel. You'd like us to have different things going on. Elon Musk, I like that you have a good picture of him. What does an artist not do well? When is an artist overwhelmed? When should you, if you're an artist, get out?
These are all great questions. I may not remember all of them. So prompt me if I don't, but The artist is what we describe as a compelled mode, which is to say you're driven to it even if it is at your peril. And there's this famous quote, not sure it's true, of Mozart. I saw it in the movie, but Mozart at one point said, he just said, I write music the way cows piss. He could not help it. This outpouring was coming from him. That is the way that creative urge appears. The key thing with the artist leader is, as Stephen Pressfield would put it, is you have to ship, which means to be successful as artist leader, you have to convince the team. You have to build the compelling product, case, service, whatever it is. It's got to reach reality in the world to be tested and to be adopted. It can't just be that it's in your head or that it's some great idea that doesn't see the light of day. The artist has to be commercial at the end of the day in our definition of what is artist leader. One of the best quotes we heard, we interviewed a lot of leaders for the book, Right Leader, Right Time. And one of the greatest quotes I heard from an artist leader, I said, what happens on your worst day? He said, oh, it's to be ignored. It's to be ignored. That you have this output that has to come to the world. And if your team, your sponsors, your board, your investors, if they're not getting it, if they're not absorbing it, it's bad. Very interesting that these different leadership styles respond differently to what constitutes success or failure.
Now, are artist leaders, if you're a really good artist leader, is every single one that you start, every single idea that you have, is it a home run, or is there a fair amount of failures in the midst of it?
Massive quantities of failures,
okay.
Right and left. Of all the modes, the most failure prone and the most failure tolerant, which is it's a great question as a contrast. If you are failure prone in fixer mode, you're not a good fixer. That doesn't define fixer. Fixer is you really are able to put out the fires. And that is why people will trust you to keep doing it again and again. Overall failure tends to be rare. Artist mode, oh my God. You look at anyone who's creative, Thomas Edison to Steve Jobs to Elon Musk to whoever your favorite local creative is, they're failing all of the time. Not all. They're failing most of the time to occasionally get to something as successful. And we, in our wonderful American sense of free markets and entrepreneurship, we are the best in the world at this because we accept and we embrace that.
So the entrepreneur, the person who's kind of drawn towards maybe entrepreneurship and starting it up, does it tend to be an artist?
I don't think so. We did not specifically aim our research or this book at entrepreneurs. It's not to exclude them, but we wanted to cross the range of business that was not simply startup, that would look all the way into the Fortune 500.
Yeah.
Because it's a very different kind of training and journey for a strategist leader. Many strategist leaders are in large organizations, and their journey is far different. It always involves cross-training. There is always a sense of being mentored and mentorship. There is always more of a sense of loyalty to an organization and sacrifice. And in smaller organizations and entrepreneurship, that doesn't play as much. It's not that entrepreneurs don't value all of those qualities. It's just that that's not first and foremost in their leadership style or their drive.
Got it. I think it's really interesting to be thinking about this in different areas. The artist, I mean, you give a great example of Elon Musk. What's a great example of maybe of a fixer?
Well, for example, there was a company called Tyco. Many people may remember, and it got into trouble, and they called in a remarkable fixer named Ed Breen. He then went into DuPont. I don't think I've ever had a Hostess Twinkie. I've had Ho-Hos, I'll admit it. Twinkie, I don't think so. Twinkies, they're going to survive in landfills a couple hundred years. Anyway, right. Twinkies went bust. The company went bankrupt twice, not once, but twice.
Yeah.
A huge number of inefficient plants, bakeries, and finally a guy named Dean Metropolis came along, and third time must have been the charm. That they modernized, somewhat automated bakeries. They brought it back to life. If you're a fan of Twinkies and Ho-Hos, you've been saved. That's that kind of remarkable fixer energy.
It's interesting right now to be thinking about this in regards to something like Starbucks, where obviously you have Howard Schultz come in and probably build the company, and the company then goes through just some droppings. So it's losing some of it, and here's Howard Schultz back. So that takes us to the builders. Can a builder actually be a fixer when there's no problem? What's that correlation? It seems like there's a lot of connection between those two. What's the semantical difference or the true difference?
For starters, we would never try to pigeonhole a leader as only one particular style.
Let's pause right here. That's really good to know, because I think as we listen to this, all of us are thinking about which friend's character am I? Am I Ross? Am I Rachel? Am I Joey? And we're like, I'm one or the other. And well, I don't quite fit that. So it's good. I like that you're saying you're not just one.
No.
So talk to us a little bit about that.
We liken this to, DNA. All of us, your Aunt Mary, the cactus on your desk, your dog Fido. Well, my dog's name is Norman. We all are composed of just 4 nucleotides, that make up DNA, but to infinite variation, which is what forms all flora and fauna. And we look at leadership the same way, which is there's infinite variation in these fixer, artist, builder, and strategist modes. The thing we've observed about successful leaders is there tends to be 1 or 2 dominant modes. So we use a historical example of Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill, remarkable leader, he fixed the Western world. He did what was necessary. And if you look at his career, it very much was his thinking of how do you save, how do you correct. Very interesting. World War II ended. He was immediately thrown out of office. Right? I mean, we need to remember what happened, which is British were sick of war. Yeah. And so it needed a different style leader to come in. So some people are more extreme. I am, to my peril, probably mostly wired as an artist leader. What that means in my businesses is very well by surrounding myself with, for example, great builders, because we're in growth mode as an organization. Wow. We talk to a lot of strategists, and a huge compliment for most strategist leaders is an artist. That's the renegade on the team. Intel had a famous, what Andy Grove called, what did he call him? I'm spacing out on the quote we had in the book. But they had kind of an odd duck. And Andy Grove said he had to have that guy, that artist on the team, because he was always thinking differently than the rest of the team was. And he wanted that. He needed that energy.
I have a friend who's definitely he's a great leader, fantastic leader. He's definitely got the multiple things going on. He's definitely that kind of imaginative artist leader. He's got a strategic to him as well. And I'm interested to hear more about that. But it was very interesting. At one point in time, everything was growing that he was touching, but they weren't growing to their full potential. And so his team actually came alongside him and said, you are not allowed to do anything new for an entire year. Oof. And it was very hard because he's the founder, he's the guy who's got it, but he had so many things going on that is to the detriment. And so he had to really focus in on doing this and find outlets within those areas to put his artistic bent to.
You're completely right. And there is a disciplined side and an undisciplined side to each one of these leadership styles. And for the artist leader, you have to ship. It's not just you're going to have a great idea. It is that it has to get successfully into the world. Yeah. And this example plays out, Thomas Edison, the phonograph. Yeah, it's really cool technology, and go get a patent on recording the human voice. But he then had to go figure out, how do you hire salespeople? How do you manufacture these things? How do you get it into the American home and people figuring out how to use it? The electric light, great. You got the bulb. Well, then what is the block in New York to prove the use of your invention.
Right. Yeah, that's fascinating. Okay, so for people who are always having ideas, you're listening to this and you're going from place to place, career to career, there's some artists in you. And check into maybe having some builders around you, especially if you're the top person there. So let's get into then what this. Oh, I did an interview with Chandler Bolt a couple months ago, and he founded the self-publishing school, and it's just doing fantastic. Many people have written their books because of him. It's how I ended up writing my first book. Now I have a publisher and such. But my first book that really catapulted my coaching career was through the system. And he is a system builder. He is definitely that guy who everything is systematized. E-myth, systematization right there.
Yep.
Okay, let's dive into this last category, strategy. What does it look like to be a strategist?
And strategist here, we are using the word in the different sense of a leader being strategic. All leaders to be successful have to be strategic. You're thinking chess moves down the board. Strategist here, we could have used a word like pilot, quarterback, conductor. This is the person who can lead at scale. And it's very interesting if you start, not just for yourself, but think about the leaders around you. Just the talk is so different. When you talk to a strategist leader, they're just not, it's not the same kind of upbringing, if you, in the sense of how they grow up in an organization, or in the sense of how they lead. One of the strategist leaders we interviewed, he ran an organization with 14,000 people, and he would say, you know, there's this vast middle that you have to move. Like, what do you mean the vast middle? He said, well, you know, in large organizations, you have underperformers, and frankly, they're going to get taken care of. If you're a strategist high up the organization, you really don't need to worry because something is going to happen there. He said, then there's this really high end of super ambitious. You don't need to worry about those folks either so much because they've got batteries included. They're self-firing all day long. He said, you have this vast middle of organizations, and you should never assume that their motivation is the same. It's not the same as necessarily the high achievers, and it may not be the same motivations as you have as a strategist, but you have this obligation, this mission, and this challenge to figure out how do you move the vast middle of an organization. Now, all of us face competitors. And so in particular, what he was saying, his example is in the insurance business, very competitive, which is, well, how do you excel beyond your competitors? What does that vast middle look like in terms of how do you get them aligned, moving faster? How do you increase the cadence of that organization? How does the cadence speed up of the marketing department, of the sales, of underwriting, of operations? Fascinating take.
It really is. I mean, the study of leadership is very interesting. And I think that there's a lot that as people are listening to this, I would highly recommend. I think Robert just did the audio book as well, and he's got a whole bunch of things coming out with the book as well. So by the time that this is released, there'll be some more resources for you. That's Right Leader, Right Time with Robert Jordan. And who's your co-author?
Olivia Wagner.
Olivia Wagner. I knew it was Wagner. And so check that out. And there's going to be a lot more that we can't even dive into right here. Can you give us another case study? Let's look at someone like a Jeff Bezos, someone who started a company in a garage, someone like that, or a Bill Gates, someone that everybody is very, very well aware of.
Jeff Bezos is an interesting example and somewhat of an evolution, if you want to compare him to, say, a Fred Smith from FedEx, who evolved from artist, fixer, builder, to strategist as his highest and best use. Jeff Bezos clearly has strategist mode in him because of how Amazon developed, but there's a very strong artist streak in there. Not only just thinking up what was Amazon and having a vision for it, but along the way, in terms of being a champion for products and the way the services evolved at Amazon. And, one indicator we would say of artist mode is this parallel focus. So he's had an interest in space. and has a completely separate company involved in space exploration. That's part of his artist mode coming out. But my gosh, one of the greatest strategists of the modern age.
Very interesting to look at someone like Jeff Bezos, where you have someone who did have that early on. Look, we're going to lose money at the beginning, and then we're going to make money. We're going to do this e-commerce thing. We're going to do it right, and then go this whole route. There's obviously multiple reasons why somebody at the top of their game would step down. So I don't want to venture into and try to imagine why. Is there a common theme where you see when somebody has built something like what Jeff did there, that they switch out and they start looking for a leader? And who are they looking for typically?
I have an example that we should talk a little about Sheryl Sandberg.
Oh yeah, let's do that.
Facebook, now known as Meta, because I believe she is one of the greatest COOs, number twos in modern business history in terms of what she helped do at Facebook. When she started, it was an organization of a couple hundred people. I think it was around 100 million in revenue. What are they at now? $120 billion. Her ability in that role as builder was extraordinary. It's really interesting though. She had about a 14-year run. When she started, she very famously said she hoped her goal was to be there 5 years. Now just think about this from builder wiring, which is she kind of set her own journey. At about year 7, my observation, just completely as an outside observer, we didn't interview her, but she had accomplished everything a builder could anywhere, in any company at any time, in terms of what she had driven up to scale. And it's interesting to see how the problems mounted up after that point in terms of scandals that Facebook got into, Cambridge Analytica and Russian meddling. I just think it's sad that a lot of the articles, she announced her retirement, leaving Meta, and so many of the major media, they used this phrase about her saying a mixed record. And it kind of drove me nuts, which is she's one of the greatest COOs of the modern era. But I can also acknowledge, or my point of view is, she stayed too long. And if you have that kind of great builder wiring, you have to know and honor your own sense of style, which is there's a point when you've got to move on.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. Okay, so the book is Right Leader, Right Time. I love this concept right here. I'm a big fan of frameworks. Frameworks give us lens to see everything, gives us handles. It's not the way, it's not the only way to see something, but it gives us handles. And what you're talking about here gives 4 handles for people to really look at their own leadership style and maybe to draw some conclusions about where they should go in their career. And there's a lot of career movement right now, and so there's a good time to be checking this out. Okay, let's wrap this up here, because I think there's so many more areas that we could go. But when people are listening to this, how can people personally assess their own strengths and weaknesses as a leader?
Well, I think, Mike, your podcast is a great start. As people hear these descriptions, I have a feeling most people will glom onto something. We describe more of this on a website at rightleader.com. There is a leadership assessment coming out called FAB's Leadership Assessment at the site. It's free, and if you want to come and take it, it's about a 3-minute profiling, and it's in the early stages, but we're going to see if we can help folks determine their best style.
Love it. Great. Hey, this is fantastic, Robert. Thanks so much for being on the show. Is there anything else, any kind of parting words you want to leave with us here today?
I'm just so honored to be on with you, Mike. It's been a thrill. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really, really enjoy this whole concept. I'm a huge fan of assessments. I tell people to do assessments all the time in my coaching. Huge fan of assessments, and love that they have a chance to kind of look at it. I think I'm probably an artist, is part of it. And that's probably my leading one. And second, I'm probably a fixer, and then strategy, and then last builder. How about you? What's your self-assessment of yourself?
Very strong an artist, secondary and builder. And I would have said of you, you have to have strong artist mode, because even the process, you know, you've gone through an active self-creation and recreation.
Yeah, recreation.
And your decision, for example, to do this and to maintain a wonderful podcast, that's an act of innovation.
Hey, well, thanks. We really appreciate that, Robert. Well, thank you so much, really, for being on the show. I've been absolutely great.
Thank you, Mike.
And to all of our listeners and all of our viewers, thank you so much for taking the time to dive in. This has been Advanced with Mike Acker and Robert Jordan, really helping you take the next step in your career. Make sure to like, subscribe, share, comment, do whatever you need to make sure that this shows up on a weekly basis, and pass it along to someone else. Until next week.
Thanks for listening to Advance with Mike Acker, a podcast designed to provide an edge for leaders through improving practical leadership skills and increasing confidence in speaking. Mike is a best-selling author and business owner who has helped many leaders increase their skills and their confidence, propelling them to new heights in their personal and professional endeavors. Join an incredible group of professionals taking the steps to become better leaders at connect.stepstoadvance.com. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.